Hey everybody, this is Linda with Ink Stamp and Scrap. Thanks so much for joining me for our weekly workshop. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to go through 10 steps to mass producing cards. Of course, my intention is to get this in time for you to create your holiday cards, but you could use this anytime that you need to create a lot of cards. Maybe in January you want to get a bunch of birthday cards created so you're ready to start the year off right. If you're really industrious, maybe that'll be December. But we'll see how all of that comes together. But today I'm going to walk through an ebook that I just published to show you how to mass produce your cards. They're my best tips with my 20 years experience being a paper crafter and making holiday cards every single year, along with many other times when I had to do some mass production. Hi to everybody who's joining me live. If you are on Team Replay, please leave a comment below and let me know. But without further ado, let's get started. All right, so my name is Linda. I'm the owner of Ink Stamp and Scrap. And if you would so kindly do the YouTube things, like this video, share it with your friends, and by all means, subscribe to my channel, ring the bell so that you can be notified every time I post a new video. Let me give you a glimpse of the ebook that I just published. You'll find it on my blog. The link is below this video. That's not the ebook, that's a card we created a while ago, but we are going to use that today for some of my instructions. So it's all about mass producing your cards. And we're just going to thumb through it page by page. I'm not going to show it to you here. You can read it on your own. You can download it. There's links inside that you can use. But I think this will be a super helpful guide for you guys when you're doing your mass production. And I see my little tape here needs to move out a little because that's going to bug me. Okay. That's my little guide as to how high I can go. Obviously, I missed just a little bit. There we go. All right. So what you'll find in here is step by step. The one thing I want to point out, you go through step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. And step 5 is another planning step. So with step 1, we'll talk about that in a minute. But then 5 is broken down into a bunch of steps because you could really do these in any order. It just depends on what kind of a card you're making. You might even skip some of these. And then we get to 6 where we're assembling and doing accessories and so on. So let's take a look through this through the eyes of making cards. What we're going to use as a basis for flipping through the mass producing ebook are the cards that we've created in the last few workshops. So I'm just gathering, something's gonna fall. I'm just gathering those so we can use those as examples. Grab what fell. There we go. All right. This is a great example of a really easy mass production card because it's monochromatic. That's something to think about. I'm going to kind of flip through these and talk through them, and then we'll continue to make our way through the ebook. This is a great mass production card. Maybe a few more embellishments that you want. That depends on how many you're making. If your number is below 30, I think this is great. If you're approaching 40 and beyond, you might want to rethink this just a little bit. Maybe the bling is just a little too much. Maybe one at the top is going to be enough or something like that. Again, great mass production card. It's monochromatic. You have the green ball or speckles behind, but it doesn't take a lot of effort since those stamps are coordinated. Now this is going to take a little bit more. This is a coloring card, so you're going to need to put a little more effort into this. You're going to want to set aside some time to color, but again, it's fairly easy in terms of the layers. This is going to use more ink color, but again, really like it for mass production, given that it's only one accessory and super easy to create. You have your quarter layer on top, which helps you with mistakes. All right, so that gives you kind of an idea. We'll continue to flip through, but I want to start talking about the first couple of steps. So the first step is to make a plan. And how do you make a plan? You start creating. Just have some fun. Grab the stamps that you intend to use for the holidays, or the couple of stamp sets that you want to try out, the dies that you want to try out, and just start creating cards. I mean, that's basically what I've done for the last few workshops. So you're welcome to copy these, make them your own, change them around however you'd like to. But these are a great basis for what you could do for your holiday cards. We'll have a repeat of something like this for birthdays coming up once I can get my hands on some of those new birthday stamps that Stampin' Up! Is bringing out. Um, but copy these. But the first thing is just let your creativity flow. Just enjoy. Make as many cards as you want, you know, change stuff around. You might not want to glue everything down permanently. You might want to create some layers and maybe try this on a green card and a white card and a speckled background and whatever. So just play around and land on a card that you really are proud of and you appreciate and you want to send to your friends and family. Then take a step back, and you'll see in the ebook, I have you ask a few simple questions as to what you want to, whether this card makes a good um, mass production card or not. So the first thing you want to ask is, are there too many layers? Now, none of these I would say qualify as too many layers. I'm trying to see if I have one handy. Not really. Do, do, do. But if I was making, I will say, if I was making, you know, 150 cards, I might think twice. Let's see here. I might think twice about a card like this, maybe. I might eliminate one of these labels. I definitely would think twice about this because that's a lot of die cutting and a lot, and these are all inlaid. So that's a lot of manual work to get a card done. Even though it's a simple layout, it's a lot of work to get this card done because of all the die cutting. And maybe if I was, like I said, in the 100 to 150 range, this might not be one that I would consider. You want to consider your time when you're thinking about doing mass production. How much time do I have to give to making all these cards? And once you've made the first one, you might even want to make a couple of more the same and see how long it takes you to put a whole card together. And the last thing you want to look at is, do you have enough materials? Is this a holiday season where you're trying to use everything up? If that's the case, maybe you want to design a card like this one, where we saw how easily it was to switch to different colors. And in fact, I even have my Florida version of that card right here. So it was really easy to kind of switch things up. So maybe it's this year, it's a basic design, and you're going to go through a lot of different iterations with colors so that you can use up some of the supplies that you have. All right. The next thing that I recommend you do once you're happy with your design is to cut your layers. And when I say cut your layers, I don't just mean, especially this is a great example. I don't just mean the card, obviously the card base, this crumb cake layer, these 3 layers here, but also cut what you're going to need for your die cutting. Think through how you're going to die cut this. Now, this is almost a quarter sheet and it's one die, and I did it, it's 2 dies. I did it twice. So that's another half a sheet. But another example are these labels. I could cut a long narrow strip like this of basic white and create a bunch of labels over and over again. I could even have in my die cutting machine, I could have a strip like this of basic white and a strip of evening evergreen and do both labels, 1, 2, 3, and just keep running it through. So those are the kind of things that you want to think about. What's going to be the best way to cut your paper in order to maximize your time and minimize your waste? Then what I recommend is, now that you've cut all your layers, you have your card base, let's finish that off. Especially if you're not going, if your card base isn't your only layer. I'm assuming you're going to have more layers. If you aren't, then you can skip step 2 because all you have to do is cut your card base and you're finished. But finish off your card base, score it, and stamp on the back or create labels to decorate the back of your card. Um, you might want to get a personalized stamp, or you might just want to sign the back. But definitely take ownership of the art that you're creating, and so people can remember that, yeah, this was hand stamped by me. Then step 4 is going to be to score and fold not only your card base and burnish the center so that you have a nice crisp fold and set that aside, but if there's any other layers that you need to fold, maybe you're doing like a card in a card, or it's a gift card holder or something like that. If there's any other additional scoring that and folding that you need to do, I would suggest you do it after you have all of your layers cut. Let's take a second to talk about organizing here, because I know I get questions on that. These are 2 of my favorite organizing containers. This one I got at IKEA, and it's got two little spots, two medium-sized spots, and one large spot. And the thing I love about these sizes, I can't promise they still make this, but I can drop full layers in those two. I can't in these, but these are always great for the smaller layers. And then my finished cards or supplies that I'm using at that time. Maybe I am in the middle of doing a step where I need my take your pick tool. I need some glue dots. I need some liquid glue. All that stuff goes here. So look around for a multi compartment container that you can keep everything together while you're doing mass production. I also have this handy one that I got at the Container Store. Same idea. I'll do it this way. It's got three full card size slots so I can stand my cards up. Doesn't matter if the orientation's the other way. It just gives me an opportunity to kind of separate my layers. I can't necessarily store all of my materials that I'm using, but it does definitely give me the opportunity to keep layers separated and be able to see everything. So I really like this too. Container Store, IKEA, those are great places to look. I'm sure Target is a great place to look as well. This video is not sponsored in any way. I'm just sharing the knowledge. All right, so let's talk about, oh, I messed myself up because I had to move that. Let's talk about step 5. We are already to step 5. So this is what I call planning part 2. So step 5 is where you need to look at your design and see what out of my ebook. I actually want to bring myself in here because I feel like since it's such a talking head sort of video, I should probably do that. Let's find, oh, there we go. Nope. Oh, other way. Sorry, technology. Here we go. Whoop, there I am. All right. I feel like once you have your design, you need to take a breath and revisit your planning because the next few steps really depend on what you're doing. The Step 5 of my guide goes through steps A through E next. But you can see on this card, for example, there's no punching. So why do I need to worry about the punching? We're not going to use that part of the guide for this particular design. So what you need to do for the next part is look at your card and just think, knowing your preferred paper crafting habits, reading through the tips that I give you, in what order are you going to do the next several things? For example, for this card, remember the stamping back here was from a full sheet of cardstock, and then we just cut it down and used one on this card and had 3 more to make other cards with. So maybe it is important to do the stamping first on all of those full sheets, and then we had to cut them down real quick. That's kind of an inset step because of our card design. We've already cut all our layers, quote unquote, but I wouldn't cut this layer until I started my stamping. So it is a guide. It's not perfect. It's a great way for you to start. But remember that you're probably going to do all of the steps, but you're not going to necessarily um, maybe you're not going to do them in the exact order that I gave you. It's more of a guide. So what you want to consider, I'm just going to use my little cheat sheet here. What you want to consider are what layers you're going to stamp, what die cutting you have to do. Are you going to use some punches, and do you have any fussy cutting to do? And by fussy cutting, I mean stamping a layer and then literally cutting it out. For example, um, oh, actually, this is a good one. See this pine cone here? Even though I have a die with it, if I didn't, I could use scissors to cut it out, and that's fussy cutting, in case you're not sure what that is. So once your next plan is made, then use the pages in the book A through E to get my tips on each of those things. So for example, I'm guessing almost all of you are going to have to stamp some of your layers, even if it's just the greeting. So my 2 tips for that are don't stress, do your best. You're doing this out of love and you're creating this for your friends and family. So don't stress if it's not perfect. But if you do want to grab my favorite fix-it tool, you could grab the Tombow Mono sanding eraser. I love this thing. If you do it quickly, it will remove your little oops mistake shadow stamping that tends to happen every once in a while. The other thing when you're stamping is to make sure that you have your stamp cleaner nearby because you're going to want to clean your stamps frequently, especially if you're doing a lot of stamping. Even if you're stamping really well and you're not making mistakes, I still recommend after, 10 or so cards, 10 or so layers, clean off your stamps. You're going to have ink around the edges and you're going to want to just clean it off and get a good start. And as far as the Tombow eraser goes, there's a link in the PDF, and there will also be a link on the blog post, which is linked below as soon as I finish this video, because that's the only thing I didn't get put up today. All right, so step B, if your card has die cutting, I have some advice for you. My biggest advice is cutting efficiency. So look at die cutting efficiency. So look at what you're cutting. If you're cutting lots of skinny labels, then use my narrow strip idea and be able to cut a bunch of them. Oh, sorry, not sure why things are dinging. I thought I turned that off. Anyway, another way to maximize your die cutting and your stamping on your dies is to use a stamp positioner and die cut everything in the neutral color that it's going to be first. So let me show you what I mean by that. I would use, obviously I'm going to use Stampin' Up! Stamparatus, but you could use any stamp positioning tool. But if I needed all of these shapes, which come from these dies, and we've seen these in other cards. These are the 2 pine cones and these are 2 greeneries from I think it's the Christmas season die set, but I could be wrong. I will definitely link the correct one below when I update the blog post. But anyway, what I did is I put these on a large scrap of paper, and I'm just going to open this up and you can see what I did. So when I started, this piece of basic white was even larger than it is right now. And I laid these dies out on my piece of basic white, and I ran all 4 through my die cutting machine at once. And then I cut that piece of paper down, or cardstock down, to where I can still put magnets around to hold this in place, or I could put some repositionable adhesive underneath, to hold that in place. And then we're done with these dies, at least for now. So I have my stamp positioner, and we'll just pretend there's magnets or adhesive or something and this isn't moving. Then I'm going to take these dies and I'm going to make lots and lots of basic white die cuts. I'm going to use these little strips and just keep making lots and lots of dies, however many I need. I would use little containers like these tin ones. I think I got these at like Michael's or AC Moore back in the day. I've had them forever. These little containers, or I would use the containers that I just showed you and just use the smaller bins. Just keep them all separate. And then what you're going to want to do, we don't need the dies anymore. So now we've created all of our dies, is this is stuck down. You're going to take your stamps and you're going to put them inside of these openings. I'm just holding this. So this is exactly where the stamp fits in the die. 1, 2, oh, it's the long one. There it is. Okay. So this is where the stamp fits in the die. So it's stuck there. Now I'm going to bring my stamp. Oh, I don't have this. I'm going to make sure I can. You would normally have to do this, but I don't have the extra mat in to lift these well. So let's see if it's going to lift. Oh, I stuck it down too tight. Oh, goodness. One thing leads to another. What did I do? Oh, there we go. Okay. That didn't work so well. All right. Well, we're going to try this again. Let me hang on one second. Please hold. This is what I need. Because they're clear stamps, I need it to be a little bit higher. All right, so I'm going to put it right here. And I can still do this super fast. All right, the disadvantage to live is I can't edit that out. All right, so if I were to, and yes, I did, managed to tear that stamp at some point. I kind of was in a hurry when I was moving it from one thing to another. Okay, so now my 4 stamps are in here and they're staying on this because it's got some repositionable adhesive on it. I'm going to set this down and pull up my stamps. I don't care if the white paper goes. So I'm going to bring it right back to where it was. There we go. So I have my stamps over here. Now what I can do, so this is probably another day. One day you did lots of white die cutting, and then on another day you're going to put all of these different dies in. You're going to have your ink pads out and you're going to ink these up. Do I have a small one here? There we go. And you're just going to keep going around. Maybe these are brown and these are green. So you're going to ink these up brown, ink these up green. And then you're going to set this down and look at that. Now you just stamped all 4 of your dies at once. Is in the exact right place that it needs to be because you lined up the stamp with the opening before you ever started. And then when you lift this up, you will have beautifully stamped die cuts. And that, my friends, will make your stamping of the die cuts go way, way faster. All right. So that is my biggest die cut saving time advice for your mass producing. The other thing that I would say is if you're going to follow the directions that I just gave you, when you're creating your white dies, stuff happens. You get distracted and you stamp the green ink where the brown ink was supposed to be. So make yourself some extras when you're in the die cutting step. So if you're making 60 cards and you need 60 of these, make yourself 65. It doesn't take much longer and you'll be so much happier than having to take the die out and find some white cardstock and start all over again. So definitely make a few extras of the dies. All right, so there is that. Those are my die cut layer tips. Now, fussy cutting. I am not going to demonstrate my fussy cutting because I am not the best at fussy cutting. But if I was going to fussy cut, for example, a layer like that, I would definitely use the paper snips from Stampin' Up. And of course, I have everything stacked on top of mine right now. But I would definitely use these because they're sharp. The blade is long enough for most stamped images. And the biggest thing that you want to do is when you have your stamped image and you're going to cut along here, when you get to a corner, you want to turn and continue cutting. So you want to end your cutting along a line if you can. And you want to keep cutting and moving your paper around as you're cutting. I hope that makes sense. I think this might need to be a short little video on fussy cutting. I can feel it. But the 2 best things about fussy cutting are that your scissors are clean and sharp, and that you use a continuous cut for as long as you possibly can. Obviously, eventually you're going to run out of blade, but as you're cutting along, you want to try to slowly close the blade and cut for as long as possible before you have to reopen it. Because it's at that point when you've closed the blade and you reopen that you tend to get that little like that little nib that sticks out along your nice, pretty straight cut line. All right, so that's fussy cutting, 5C. The next one, punching. My best advice to you for punching is very similar to die cutting. You want to do it on smaller strips of cardstock. If you had to stamp an image first, go ahead and stamp it. But this is my second piece of advice. Make sure you know the orientation of your stamp. So for example, if you were gonna punch a greeting or stamp a greeting and then punch it out, you want to make sure that your greeting is the same way all the way across, and you've done like 5 or 6 of them, and you can just come in and just punch all of these out. If your stamp has a distinct shape to it, maybe it's a stem, so it's got leaves and a stem, you want to make sure that you stamped in the direction that it's going to be easiest to slide the stamp on and punch things out. It's much easier to hold a smaller piece of cardstock than work your way around a big piece of cardstock. So make sure you measure, like this is 2 inches of cardstock. I wouldn't do this. I would go like 2.5, just to give me a little bit of comfort zone between the top and bottom of this punch. But other than that, it's a good size strip to punch a bunch of these. And the other thing is that you always, as we always do, you always want to punch upside down so you can see what you're doing. Oh, and my last bit of advice for both fussy cutting and punching is don't try to do it all at once, especially if your card number is like 50 or above. Give yourself a few sessions of either cutting or punching because your hand's going to get tired and it's going to cramp and it's not fun. So just give yourself the grace of a few nights in front of the TV or listening to your favorite podcast or whatever, to get your punching and or your fussy cutting done. All right, let's talk dry embossing. We have some right here, and we have some on this card right here. So my best advice to you for dry embossing a layer is to do it. You could do that right after you cut all your layers. If you're just going to straight dry emboss it, and then it's going to get glued on. Or you can wait until you get a little farther down the road. But when you're using a embossing folder, you might want to mark the middle. You also, on this one, I don't have a guideline on the bottom, and I might want to do that. But make sure when you do things like that, you use a permanent marker, first of all, and secondly, you use the outside of the folder. This is clear plastic. It doesn't, from a visual standpoint, it doesn't matter where the mark goes, but from a, I don't want it on my cardstock, you want to make sure this one was initially drawn here. You want to make sure you draw on the outside of your folder. Don't draw on the inside. Even though it's permanent, save yourself a headache. Don't do it that way. All right. The next step after we have, so now we have gone through cutting all our layers, getting our card base ready, stamping our layers, fussy cutting, punching, die cutting, dry embossing. We are all ready to go. Now it's time to pick some adhesives and do some assembly. The next thing that you want to do is think about from a economic standpoint and from an ease of use standpoint. Now, liquid glue is definitely economical and it gives you that extra chance to wiggle things around a little bit. But it's liquid and it can be messy and not preferred by some people. Stamp and Seal has the same strong bond, but it's dry. It's much easier to use. If you are concerned, if you have a card with a lot of movement to it, you might want to use tear and tape. If you're looking for a dry adhesive, that would work well with that. And if you're working with very small things, I would highly recommend you consider glue dots. So that's kind of the logic behind which ones you use. You may also use dimensionals because you want to add something to a layer. So that's another, I would still consider that an adhesive. Now, as far as your embellishments or your accessories go, I do have step 7 as ribbon, but I want to point out sometimes you can't finish your assembly before you start with the ribbon. For example, this card, we wrapped this ribbon around these 2 layers and then we added that whole thing to the card. So that's what I mean, that the document I created for you is a guide. It's a great reference, but it's not the, okay, I'm going to do step 1, then step 2, and I'm going to follow it through and my card's going to turn out perfect. Because in this case, if you would have waited until after you did all your gluing down to get to your accessories, you would have never been able to do the ribbon this way. So just think through a little bit as you're going through the guide. It is a guide. In this case, I would have done the wraparound ribbon, and then I still would have done all the gluing and everything for this one. And I would have put my ribbon on as my last step after my adhesive and assembly step. The other thing to remember is that this score line in this card is a great example of if there was more scoring to do besides the main fold in the card, you would do that at step 2. And this is the style of card. I mean, if it's a bookbinding card, you want to do, you're going to do both scores and then make sure you burnish the second one as you're finishing up step 2. All right. So now let's talk about embellishments or accessories. We're down to the last two steps before you are finished. So if you are going to have a ribbon, I highly recommend you use the 10-second bow maker. You'll see lots of comments in previous videos about how fast and easy that little guy is, and you will see a link below. It is an affiliate link. It does not change your price. It simply helps my business, and I do appreciate it. I would also use glue dots when you're attaching ribbon to anything. They hold strong and they're small, and you can't really see them, which is a good thing. If you are going to use adhesive backed um, embellishments like the red rhinestones, those just make sure it was around here. You have your take your pick tool handy for things like that. It's great to be able to take them off the sheet and put them on. You've seen me do that many, many times. So this take your pick tool is great. And if you happen to put them in the wrong place, you can always use the putty knife to take them off, which is great. If you are using if you're using embellishments that aren't adhesive backed, I guess I would say, for example, like this star here was a die cut, but it didn't have adhesive on it. So I used a glue dot on the back. You can see the glue dot just a little bit around the edges. I could have used just a dot of liquid glue. And in either case, I would have also used my take your pick tool to pick it up, maybe drop it in the glue, and then bring it over here because you've got this putty end to this tool. So you can decide on their smaller non-adhesive embellishments whether a glue dot or liquid glue works best. If you're going to use a glue dot, I would also recommend that you grab your anti-static tool, it used to be the Embossing Buddy, and tap it on your embellishments that you use glue dots just to take any tack away outside of those embellishments, because this way it won't stick inside your envelope, because that would be a disaster. That you definitely don't want to happen. All right. And step 8, the last thing I want to talk to you about is decorating your envelope. This is a smaller size envelope. This is a note card envelope, so it's made for a 3.5 by 5 card, but my recommendations still hold. If you are going to decorate the envelope, 9 times out of 10, I recommend that you do all your decorating on the flap, and then the postal service will have no trouble getting it to whomever you're sending it to. If you really want to stamp on the front of your envelope, restrict yourself to this corner over here, this left lower corner. It's away from the address, it doesn't blur the return address, and you don't want any stamping around the postage stamp, because you want the cancellation of that stamp to be very clear to your mail carrier, or they won't deliver it. As far as the flap goes, if I was going to do any decorating on my flap, I would make sure that I had scratch paper. Hang on one second, let me grab a little piece of grid paper to show you how easy this is. Let me grab my pad of grid paper. So if I was going to stamp on this, what I would do is lift up one sheet and hook my flap underneath. So now I know I can stamp on here. I could stamp off the edge because it's raised above wherever. I'm not going to get any ink on my table. And I'm only going to stamp on the flap itself. So that's one way to decorate this. Another way to decorate your flap is to put it through an embossing folder. Again, you only want to put it through this part of your embossing folder, and you're more than likely going to end up feeding it through your machine in this direction. Not the recommended direction, but it will still emboss, especially because your envelope is such a thin piece of paper. It's not thick like cardstock, so you don't need to worry about the direction so much, because the pressure will distribute and work just fine on this weight of paper. So you could dry emboss. And the other option that you have is to add scrapbooking paper, designer series paper to this layer. If you're going to do that, I would measure the maximum width here and add a 1/4 inch. And then I would line up my border right here and put a little bit of liquid glue around the tab or the flap itself, and let those dry. Just go to town one night and put all of your extra large pieces of designer series paper over the flap, lining them up perfectly so you don't see them when the envelope is closed, and then let them dry and walk away. And then the next night, come back and flip them over and fussy cut all of them. Doing it that way also makes sure that you still have the area to lick and seal your envelopes. All right, so that takes you through 3 different ways to decorate your envelopes, and I do believe we have now made it through my top tips for mass producing. So let me bring myself, I think this will work. Nope, that didn't work. That definitely didn't work. Oh, I know what I have to do. I know. You'd think I would have gotten used to this by now. Oh, there it is. Okay. None. Voila, there I am. Okay, so it's a short but sweet video this week, but I hope that you appreciated the tips. I'm going to pull up the comments real quick and see if there are any questions. Let me see here. Oh, thanks for everybody who shared. I appreciate it. Glad that you liked all the tips. If you are watching on Team Replay, let me know your favorite tip in the comments. I would love to know. And I'm always curious how many holiday cards you guys are creating this year. I find it fascinating, those of you that dedicate yourselves to make lots and lots, and some of you make not too many, but they are just to die for. Um, Oh, let's see. I have the Sizzix machine. If I buy the 3D plate from Stampin' Up! For embossing, will it work with my machine? Yes, it will work just fine with your machine. If you get a 3D embossing folder from Stampin' Up! And you get the 3D embossing, what am I looking for? Plate. I'll just leave it at that. Then yes, it should work just fine with your Sizzix machine. Thanks, Kathy. I'm glad you guys liked all the tips. I'm looking forward to sharing more fun things with you. Next week, we will be back to our regular time, which is Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And we're doing boxes. I have 5 great tips for you to create boxes. So we are going to move away from cards at this point for the holidays, not for good. We're going to do a couple weeks of some other fun kind of paper crafting projects. I do believe the following week we will do tags, and then we'll be able to get into previews of the upcoming occasions catalog. I am used to calling it. It's the January to June catalog that will start in January, but I'll start doing some previews of that in December. So once again, I am Linda and I own Ink Stamp and Scrap. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. Welcome to my channel. I really appreciate you watching. If you are not a subscribed member yet, please click that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and I will let you know the next time I post a video. All right, so enjoy making your holiday cards, and I will see you next Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Take care.